my name is Margarida Maria Marques. That was my name. And then I was born in Kowloon, actually.
What year?
1931, October 1931. My parents met in Kowloon. My mother is from Macau. She was the daughter of a surgeon, and he's part Goan, and he was working for the military in Macau. He was a very busy surgeon. When he retired, and his family were there too. He had brothers and sisters, and they were all married to people like the governor and the colonel and all people like that, you know. So when my grandfather retired, he decided to go to Hong Kong because there were more jobs for my mother and my aunt, who went to commercial school because my grandfather was educated in England, and he saw that women worked, so he had my mother go to the commercial school, and the bishop was very angry because she couldn't go to a boys' school, but he said he wanted to excommunicate my grandfather. And my grandfather said, you can't do that because I didn't do anything wrong. The woman has as much rights as a man.
Could you give me the names of your grandfather?
My grandfather's name is Eugenio Marciano Alvarez. And so my mother was the first woman to work in Macau. She worked for Melco in Macau. So when he retired, he wanted my mother to go to Hong Kong. And my aunt also went to school that way. So they went to Hong Kong, and they lived on Ashley Road. And so my grandfather had retired by that time, and he took a job working on a ship because he became a hospital doctor, you know, the ship doctor, and traveled between Hong Kong and Java. And so my father lived across the street from my mother. He was a single, and he was living with a sister who had 9 children, and his name was Jose Daniel Marques. And my aunt was married to a Gozano, and she had 9 children, and her husband had just died. So he moved in with her, with his brother, and helped her support her children. And so that's how my father and mother met. And I was born at 31 Ashley Road, and so was your father. And he was also born in Ashley Road. But anyway, we moved to Homerton because that was expanding in Hong Kong, you know. The Macanese people moved out of certain surroundings and went out there that way.
Where did they move from?
From Ashley Road. I don't know where they all came from, but many of them lived in Hong Kong still.
What year was this?
Oh, I don't. It must be 1932, because I remember when I was 3 years old that my sister was born in Homerton Street. I remember the day she was born, and we lived on Homerton Street, and all my cousins moved to Homerton Street, so we all lived there. You know, all my first cousins, we all lived in the same street. And we lived there for many years, and we really had a nice life, you know. We had maids, but we didn't have maids because we were rich. We had maids because there were many people in Hong Kong who didn't have jobs, so they would take any menial job, you know. So they hired all these women to take care of the children and stuff like that. Well, in the meantime, my mother was always working. My mother worked for Low, Bingham and Matthews. That's where she worked. And they were I don't know if they were sponsors or what, of the Chamber of Commerce. And my mother was very active with the Chamber of Commerce. But my mother stopped working when my sister was born. She stayed home for a while. And then my father just, they got married later in life. You know, they were 30 by the time they got married.
Can I stop you for a second?
Just like I remember a time when I was, you know, he asked if we had any homework, and I said, no, I think I must have been, you know, 8 years old, you know. I said, no, I don't have any. He opened my book, and there was the homework I was supposed to do. He says, I'm very sorry, but you're staying home because I'm taking your sister, and we're going for ice cream, and you're not going. So you'll never lie again. See, my father was very, very disciplined. So anyway, it was great. So I loved my childhood life because I had all my cousins around me, whom I'm still very close to.
How many cousins do you think you have?
Oh, I have my first cousins from my father's side. On my mother's side, you want to know. My father's side, I have loads of cousins. Some of them I've never met because my father got married later in life, and all my cousins already, some of them had children when they are my age. You know, so my father had many brothers and sisters. Some of them were in different parts of the world too, you know.
Even then, in the 30s?
Pardon me?
In the 1930s?
Oh yeah, 1930s they were already, some of them were already married. They were all grown up.
Okay.
See, my sister and I were the last of my father's generation, you know. We were the youngest of my father's generation. My father was a bachelor for a long time, till he met my mother. And so I don't know them very well. I do know some of them, the Gozanos, of course, because my father helped to bring them up. And they treated my sister and I like we were little dolls, you know. They taught us how to play ball and taught us different things. And they made sure we went to dances and played sports. My cousins would buy me tennis racket, baseball bat, and I am no sports person. But they were very good to me. To this day, I'm very close to my cousin, the Gozano cousins, you know. There's only one left, and he's in Bellingham. His name is Luigi Gozano. And so I have cousins on my mother's side. We're very close. We still keep in touch, you know, just like your dad, you know, Nuno. And I have my aunts, the other cousins. I have how many? Elga and Eugenio and Lydia. And then on the others, your father's side, we have Jackie, who's in Portugal, and Claudette, Mission Viejo, and Jeanette is in Las Vegas, and Tina is in San Diego. So we are all still very close, and we do have a cousin, Thelma, in Australia, and she's the first grandchild, so we haven't heard from her because I'm sure she passed away.
Tell me a little bit about your life just before the war. This is the 1930s.
Yes, I can tell you that.
Hong Kong.
Yeah. Well, we were in Hong Kong, and we had a good life. We all played together. We ran across the street to each other's homes. You know, we had no telephones then, and we'd rig up tins, you know, across the street, and strings of cans, you know, and we'd kind of like we were talking on the phone, and we'd play ball in the street, and the whole street was almost all Macanese. You know, so we had a lot of fun together. And then on the 8th of December, 1941, no, 41, when the war broke out, was 41, right? I can't remember, I think it was. No, it was 42.
No, 41.
41. Okay, when the war broke out, yes, December 41. It was on the Feast of Our Lady of the,
Immaculate Conception.
Immaculate Conception. That was a feast, that was a holiday, you know, so we had no school. We had started school later, you know, so we were still home when the war broke out.
Where were you exactly?
I was at home with the two maids. My sister and I were the two maids, and my mother and father had gone to Mass, and they went to St. Teresa's. And when they heard the thing, my mother ran home. My mother ran home, and she even broke her heels. My mother was very vain. She used to wear high heels, and my mother liked makeup. She bought makeup from France, you know. I always laughed because everybody who came to town, she would ask them, when you go to France, buy me a crème samon. So it's been a joke for in our family that my mother was very vain.
So she broke her heels.
Uh-huh.
She was on her way home.
She ran all the way home because with the sirens going, and she broke her heels and came home to make sure we were okay. And in the meantime, my father worked for WWII Docs, and he went to work. He was already on the bus going to work. And so when she came home, my cousin Elga, who lives a few doors down, came and said, there is a war, so you can't go to school today. She said.
But this is a Sunday, and you were going to school?
No, it wasn't a Sunday. It was, I don't remember what day of the week it was, but it was a school day.
It was a school day.
We were supposed to start school later because it was a holy day of obligation, and they would have mass for the school.
Okay.
So she said, don't go to school, you have to stay home. So I started packing my stuff, so I packed all my dolls. So my sister and I started packing our stuff because my father had prepared, he was prepared for the war. He had bags, canvas bags made, in those days they prepared things. My father worked for WWII Docks, so he had all these things made by the dock from the dockyard, all those big canvases. So we were preparing, and my mother came home and says, no, you can't pack things like that. You have to pack your clothes. So we stayed home, waited, didn't know what to do because my uncle by that time, Elga's father, was already stuck in Hong Kong. He couldn't come home. So they came over to our house because we lived on the ground floor and they were on the top floor.
You were in Kowloon.
We were in Kowloon in Homerton Street.
Okay, but the invasion came from the north.
From the north, from Hong Kong, that side, right? From Pearl Harbor.
Right.
Yeah, so
the Japanese invasion came from the Chinese mainland through.
Yes, I know they did that, but we could see the planes flying.
They were bombing Hong Kong.
They were bombing Hong Kong, oh definitely. So we stayed in the ground floor. And before the war started, we had all black curtains made for the windows.
So you anticipated the war because you...
Yes, they did. In 1938, they already thought the war was going to be there, but it didn't come. And so, but they knew it would come. So they had already made all these curtains in the house, all dark curtains to cover the light.
So your family had been preparing for the war for almost 3 years.
That's right. Yeah, in fact, that's where your grandmother died. That's how your grandmother died too, because they were anticipating the war, and she had just had a baby, and they sent her and the younger children to Macau. So she went to Macau, and they stayed there in Macau, and then they said no signs of war. They brought her back, but she had some problems with the delivery of her child, and so. When she came home, she passed away. She died.
So you're on the day of the invasion, and you continued to prepare and get ready to
go. No, we were going to stay there. We weren't going anywhere at first. But when my father came home, he said, I think we will go to my sister's house, because my sister's house belonged to my sister. She said, because we're going to move there and we can protect the house. This house is rented. We don't need to protect this house. If we lose everything, we lose everything. But my sister's house belongs to them. If we don't go, they will move in. The looters will move in. And my aunt had a big house. She had just bought a house. She had 9 children. Plus, she had some of her nephews and nieces who had no children. They were orphans, and they all stayed with her. So my aunt's house was a very big house. She had many bedrooms. And so we all ran from our house carrying bags, and the maids and her husband stayed at our house to protect the house. So we left with our bags. We each carried a suitcase. My sister carried one and I carried one, and my father and mother each carried 2, and we moved to my aunt's house.
How many blocks away?
Maybe about 5 blocks. Okay. I'm not quite sure now.
Full suitcases,
they're light suitcases. Okay. They're only for children, So, so we went to their house, and my aunt, who moved in with us also carried her bags because she couldn't stay in her place. It was also rented. And they didn't want to stay there by themselves, so they followed us. So they came with us. And so we went to my, all the way there were trucks of looters coming from all over, you know, and they were driving, but they didn't hurt us because, you know, they knew we were locals, you know. And so we went to my aunt's house on Suarez Avenue, and that's only a few blocks from the house. So we stayed in one room. All of us were cuddled in one room because my other cousins came as well from other parts of Hong Kong to stay in the house because they all know that's their home. But the thing is this, my aunt had to stay with us because her husband was stuck in Hong Kong, and this is my mother's sister, and my father's sister and her daughter and children were all evacuated. They were all gone to, they were sent to some, I think, I don't know where they were sent to. I have no idea.
From Hong Kong?
From Kowloon to, I think they went to Hong Kong, I'm not sure. But they were all evacuated because their sons were all volunteers. So they had a place of refuge, you know, and they took care of these people. So they were all gone. So that's why her house was empty. And that's why we all went. And my cousins came from all over the place, whom I know quite well, and we each took a bedroom.
How many days were you there?
Oh, quite a long time, because the war broke out on the 8th. I think we went on the 9th. I'm not quite sure. I think the 8th, the 9th we went, or 8th or 9th. And then we stayed until January.
Really?
Yeah, because what happened is we all stayed there, and the men had to go out every day to get food for us. So they would go and comb the streets, you know, for food, and all the women stayed home. And the Japanese would come to the homes and looking for women. So all the girls had to hide upstairs in the attic, you know. So I remember that very clearly because I was 10 years old, you know. So it was kind of scary, but to me I was a child, so I didn't kind of feel the things that they felt. But anyway, all my cousins came, and they were all there, and every day they would go find food, and they would also check on the volunteers, because the volunteers were made to dig. You know, they had axe and picks and everything, and they would go down the street and they would dig different places. And they'd walk down certain streets. So they found where the volunteers were going.
Why were they digging?
We don't know. I don't know, because I was a child. I can't remember. I mean, I don't know all these things, you know. But they would go, and my father would stand there and see his nephews, but he couldn't wave to them. And they would see him. And this happened almost every day, you know. And they'd follow them. So all my cousins were there, all in the same camp. And they saw my father many times. So, well, one day the Chinese sold us a bag of starch instead of flour. It was, so we had no food. For a while we didn't have any food. So anyway, this happened. It kept going and going until on the 3rd of January, on Christmas, we all went to Mass, you know. And during Mass, the church was, half the church was had horses. They had the stable, they made it into a stable in the back of the church. And I remember going in my overcoat, and I was feeling my overcoat, and I felt, you know, I had jewelry. My mother had sewn all our jewelry into my coats. See, this is the most interesting thing for me. She had in my coat, I felt one ring, and I said to my mom pretty loud, I said, "Mom, I have a ring in my coat." And my mom told me, she went, like that, you know. She told me to keep quiet. So I did, and I came home and she told me, she said, now, don't you ever take off your coat. First thing you do, when you need it, grab your coat. And your sister too, make sure she wears her coat, because I sewed all the jewelry into your coats, so that when we run, we have the jewelry still.
And
that's what jewelry had at home. And so, of course, the money was in the bank and we didn't have any more money, just the money we had at home. And so, well, anyway, this went on until January 2nd, because see, I remember the Christmas because of that incident. And then January 3rd, in the morning of January 3rd, we all woke up with a loud snoring. And I was sleeping my father was sleeping right next to me in a mattress, and my mother was sleeping on the bottom of the bed, you know, with my sister and the bed, and my aunt and cousins were on the other side of the room. The room was pretty big, so we shared the room, and we all huddled together. You know, she had 4 children at that time, and they all huddled together, and there was loud snoring, and we couldn't figure out what it was. And I turned around, it was my father having a heart attack. My father was having a heart attack, and I tried to shake him, you know, and we couldn't wake him up. And there was a doctor who lived on the other side of the street, so we had to get the doctor. It's curfew, we couldn't go out, and they had to, my father, the doctor climbed the roof and climbed from one roof to another, came down, and by the time he came, my father was dead.